Audiobook Academy. Book Summary. Dog Named Mr. BOSSI. By Istvan Bekefi. Dog Named Mr. BOSSI is a modern children's novel with elements of a fairy tale, full of fantastical themes and lessons worth learning. Istvan Bekefi, a Hungarian author, penned it. It's a story about a man who went from being a horrible to a decent person because of his bizarre life path. No matter what happens in the story, good always triumphs. Because he had to be transformed into a dog, lawyer BOSSI went through many painful and humiliating experiences in order to understand the full ramifications of his bad deeds toward others. The good he saw in people after going through all of that was a gift. After being a dog for a while, he realized how important it is to be kind to others. The fresh perspectives he gained from being a dog helped shape him into a better person because he understood what it takes to be content in this world. His assistant Bruno also spared him from a life of crime, believing in him even when he was an unsavory character. BOSSI had a motivation to change because of Bruno's faith in him. A good aim and faith in other people can melt ice and reach the coldest heart, especially when it is accompanied by friends, love, and kindness. Kindness, according to the author, is rooted in the capacity to feel another person's pain. We can only imagine how awful it would feel if someone did something similar to us if we were aware of the suffering we inflict others as a result of our own wrongdoing. In addition to the story's central moral, there are several sage tips and significant lessons to be found. When the man who has been transformed into a dog begins to feel the full force of existence, these secrets become more obvious. This book has a lot of fairy tale-like elements to it. In the beginning, we see daily life, and suddenly everything shifts to the magical world. In the 1920s, Brooklyn, New York, is the setting for the story. A wealthy lawyer, Mr. BOSSI owns a building in a poor area of the city. His tenants' lives have taken a turn for the worse since he became wicked and cheap. In order to teach him a lesson, a mysterious old lady curses him and BOSSI became a dog. Fairy tale aspects begin to emerge from that point forward. The most evident component is a dog that exhibits human traits. Even though the novel is built around this change, that's not all that happens in the story's magical realms. Another fairy tale influence is the happy ending, in which the villain is transformed into a hero. There are a total of 22 chapters in the book, each with a title announcing the chapter's plot. The novel was used as a basis for a musical production based on the story. Synopsis. People who just immigrated in the United States from Italy can be found in a Brooklyn neighborhood. They are compelled to live in rundown areas and in low-cost apartments until they can land a good job and start saving some money. All of the hard-working men who lived in one of those buildings had one thing in common: they were all dressed in the same way. They believed in miracles. The landlord of all of these people was the same. He was selfish, evil and cheap lawyer named BOSSI. Without him, their lives would have been a living hell. When people needed him, he never offered assistance but instead took advantage of them. He was fortunate to have an assistant who was generous. To avoid evicting people who couldn't pay their rent, Bruno would persuade BOSSI not to do so. He was known as Bruno. In addition, Bruno had to deal with the evilness and humiliation of BOSSI himself. Bruno would bark like a dog if a beggar came to the door, so the beggars would think there was no one in the house but a dog instead of a human. Bruno wasn't the only one who had to put up with him. Julia was also there. It was her uncle's will that brought her to the United States. It was too expensive for BOSSI to give her the inheritance left by her uncle. In the past, he was consistently late in making the payment. When Julia first arrived in the United States, she met Alfonso, a man she began seeing shortly after arriving. Alfonso was continually pressing Julia for money. But because she was so naive and good-hearted, she didn't even understand he was after her money. Since the day she came, Julia has been hell-bent on making life miserable for everyone else, and Bruno has been forced to assist BOSSI in collecting the money he is owed. Bruno was not pleased with the task. Due to his knowledge that Pietrino had spent all his money on treating his son Filippo's injured leg, he had no inclination to evict him. BOSSI was callous and insisted that everyone pay their rent, regardless of their financial situation. BOSSI was a constant source of frustration for everyone around him. On his way home from court one day, he stopped at his favorite pastry store to pick up a slice of his beloved cake. BOSSI was notorious for defrauding cashiers at every turn. An argument with one of the cashiers resulted in the erection of a "No Dogs Allowed" sign the following day. Kids decided to play gangster while BOSSI was at the pastry shop making her look like a bad guy. He had to pretend dead because he couldn't flee, but Filippo was also there. The youngsters came up with a new game because he didn't enjoy it. On the spur of the moment, they make a beeline for the pastry shop and prepare to hurl tomatoes at BOSSI. Filippo, the son of Pietrino, was the only one who was unable to flee when BOSSI started pursuing them. He was captured by BOSSI and hit. That was the final drop that the neighbors saw. However, despite their best efforts, BOSSI escaped to his flat and hid there until help arrived. He informed Bruno that they had attempted to kill him and should contact the authorities. But before he called the cops, Bruno went ahead and secured the flat by locking BOSSI inside and stealing the key. While everything was going on, an elderly woman entered the building. She was a tarot card reader and a horoscope writer. When she wandered around, she could see the future. Then, she assured Giulia that she would get her money and marry the guy she truly loves, while also assuring Pietrino that he would be content and would not be evicted from the flat. Alfonso was enraged because she had said some unflattering things about him. In order to fool her into believing there was only a dog in BOSSI's apartment, he barked when she approached through the keyhole. BOSSI was present, so the prophet warned him that if he didn't get loved and kissed by someone who cares about him, he'd change into a dog. Only his suite remained by his side as BOSSI deteriorated into an old, filthy dog. Bruno returned with a police officer, but BOSSI was nowhere to be found. There was only an elderly dog to contend with. According to the police, BOSSI walked out of the flat on his own. Upon Bruno's return to the flat after the police had departed, he discovered BOSSI's keys and wallet. He had no idea where the dog had come from either, and when it perched on BOSSI's chair, Bruno dubbed him Mr. Lawyer. BOSSI was perplexed as well. His sense of smell began to take over and he identified Bruno by his scent. When Bruno referred to him as a lawyer, he assumed that he was in fact one and began acting accordingly. Bruno grabbed his briefcase and headed to court after the dog informed him that it was court time. The dog was accompanying him. The court sided with the tenants thanks to the absence of BOSSI, who had been leading the case on his own. Upon hearing this, the dog became enraged. He believes that the dog is a lawyer because of the dog's answer to his question, and the judge concurred. Bruno tried to explain to the dog that he had a difficult life and that it was time for him to make amends when they returned to the workplace. It was Bruno's opinion that Giulia should be the one to get the money first. The dog turned him down when he requested it to help him open the safe. A lesson must be learned from this transition, as explained by Bruno to him. It was Bruno who tossed the dog to the street. The puppy was abandoned in the middle of the street. Because he was unclean and ancient, everyone avoided him out of fear for their safety. BOSSI made a last-minute decision to decompress at his favorite pastry store, but he discovered that dogs were no longer permitted. Upon encountering Filippo, he growled at him, but when he scented him he recognized that Filippo smelled pleasant to him. Seeing him petting an elderly dog, his mother told him to stop. After a while, the dog decided to look for a place to lay down for the night. It all started with him finding an old piece of clothing and taking it to a construction site where he dumped it on a pile of trash. Because of the questions he asked himself, Bruno came to the conclusion that his actions were the appropriate ones. He also remembered Giulia and understood that he was in love with her as well. Although Alfonso tried to urge Giulia to demand her inheritance, the latter refused, explaining that BOSSI had gone away and that she would be unable to collect her money without him. Bruno informed the tenants that the court was on their side, so they don't have to leave the building. Everyone was ecstatic and praising God in a joyful mood. For the dog's bone, Filippo made his way to the butcher shop. BOSSI waited anxiously for Filippo, afraid he wouldn't return. When he got the bone, BOSSI started devouring it while the dog was petting him. He didn't know whether the feeling was love, compassion, or thanks for Filippo. When Filippo's mother reappeared, she urged him to keep his hands off the dog. No matter how many times Giulia told Alfonso that he couldn't collect her money, he persisted in trying. If she doesn't get the money soon, Alfonso said he'll have to return to Toronto. As a final suggestion, he advised her to ask Bruno for money. He will give her the money because he was in love with her. Giulia was surprised to hear it, as she had no idea that Bruno was interested in her. Dog looked forward to playing with Filippo every day. They threw the ball around. On one occasion, some of the local boys decided to pick on Filippo and began beating him up. Filippo rushed to the dog's aid and kept him safe. When Giulia realized she needed money, she went to Bruno. Even though he was sure she would marry Alfonso as soon as she had the money, Bruno swore to do everything he could. Alfonso was overjoyed when Giulia told him the good news, but he quickly excused himself, saying he had other things to attend to. He was meeting up with Lola, the second woman he had a relationship with. Also, He was taking money from her and lying to her about how they were going to leave together when he really simply wanted to take their money and leave alone. After hearing of Bossi's scheme, Bossi showed up at Julia's office the following day, just as she was getting her money. Alfonso was supposed to have it, but Bossi sprinted after him and snatched it from his grasp. A gun was shot at him by Alfonso in the pursuit of the thief. Because of all the noise, a large number of individuals came together. There was no money left. For Julia, the prospect of not having Alfonso at her side was terrifying. In order to get rid of her, Alfonso insulted and then dumped her. He was taken into custody by the police for firing a firearm. It was hard for Julia to believe that Alfonso was a nasty guy, even if everyone around her tried to convince her that it was for the best. Bruno soothed her and offered her some of his money to help her get through this difficult time. Awed by his offer, Julia embraced him. In his company, Julia felt secure. When Filippo went to meet with Bossi, he informed him that Bruno wants to meet with him. Bruno encouraged him to put his life on the line for Julia, saying it was an honorable thing to do. Bossi declined his meal offer and returned to his new house after declining it. After hearing something on the building site, Bossi was caught by the dog shelter workers. He was taken there, where he witnessed the plight of dogs kept in cages. When Filippo and Bruno learned he'd been kidnapped, they set out to find him. As soon as he was free, Filippo went him to the building site to wait for things to settle down in the neighborhood. Bossi always had a muzzle on. Bossi was disturbed by this and went in search of Filippo. Filippo's dog had been stolen, so the boys decided to beat him. Bossi tried to help, but the dogs were unnerved by his muzzle. The boys fled as Filippo's grandfather appeared. Bossi tried to defend Filippo despite the fact that both of them were severely injured, and Filippo appreciated it. He kissed him on the cheek, then went home to tell his family what a wonderful dog he had. When he came back for the dog, all he discovered was naked Mr. Bossi trying to cover himself up with an ad for a Chinese restaurant. The occupants started chatting about Bossi's return among themselves. The fact that Bossi had matured into a decent human being made Bruno happy. In an attempt to convince Bruno that he was on the right path, Bossi explained how he was traveling, but Bruno was skeptical. Bossi was on the hunt for Filippo the following day. Filippo fled from him as he tried to take him out for ice cream. Bruno gave Bossi an update on the situation when he returned to the workplace. The renters will not be evicted, and Bruno was startled when Bossi agreed to it. In response to the lawyer's inquiry, he related the tale of Julia's money-eating dog. Asked whether Julia signed a statement claiming she had taken her inheritance, Filippo informed Bossi that she had not. No documentation has been found to support her claim of inheritance, therefore they'll have to pay her back. Bruno was able to see through Bossi's ruse, and he rebuked him for it. Julia was overjoyed when Bruno told her she'd be receiving her money. In light of the psychic prediction, Julia has come to accept that she will marry the man she loves. The position of landlord was given to Bruno, who accepted it gladly. Besides taking care of the office, Bossi instructed him to do so. Bossi made the conscious decision to live a contented life. He dashed down the steps in search of Filippo, who was searching for his dog. He had the support of all of his pals, but they were unable to locate the dog. Boris, his dog, barked when he spotted him, and Filippo recognized that Boris was his dog all along. Both of them embraced before heading to a nearby pastry store for dessert. They were given a large platter of pastries after taking down the "No Dogs Permitted" sign. Everyone was overjoyed that good had triumphed against evil. Bossi, main character. At first, he was a selfish, self-centered crook who only cared about the bottom line. He made a mockery of himself in front of everyone, even his assistant Bruno. This man never stopped to consider the impact his actions had on those around him. When it comes to anyone, he has no empathy. His primary pleasure was cake, and he would do anything to gain as much money from them as possible. His character evolved because he had to deal with the anguish, destruction, and loneliness that came with being a canine. He had nothing else to contribute save his love to everyone around him, including no friends or a place to stay. Bossi learnt what life was all about while he was the weaker one. Love and companionship are more essential than money, and being loved is better than being successful, he knew in his heart. It took him a long time to figure it out, but the important thing is that good prevailed in the end. He risked his life in the name of justice. Bossi grew up to be a kind person who aspires to live a happy life. Bossi's right-hand man, Bruno. He is a full and utter contradiction to him. Bruno, in contrast to Bossi, is decent, fair, and always willing to lend a hand. Only he recognized the potential for improvement within Bossi. As a learning experience, he was the one who cast BOSSI out into the street. People liked Bruno because he was always trying to minimize BOSSI's evilness, and that's why he was so popular. He was willing to put his own life at danger to defend the rights of others. Since she had a boyfriend, it was difficult for him to express his feelings for Julia. Even though he loved her and was terrified of losing her, he nevertheless went ahead and gave Julia her money. Fortunately, he was there when she discovered she had lost both her lover and money. Julia's lover didn't care if she was rich or poor as Bruno did. He was willing to give her everything he had, with no strings attached. In the end, he was rewarded with her adoration. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.